Hey guys, this is Colin from Blackjack Apprenticeship, and on today's podcast, I've got Nathaniel Tilton, who wrote The Blackjack Life and was a part-time professional card counter for a number of years. And thanks so much, Nathaniel, for being on our podcast.
I'm excited to be on it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. I read your book, and there were a lot of parallels. There were definitely some differences in your guys' approach to ours, and I'm excited to just ask you some questions and find out more about your story.
Sure.
But because you've written your story, I don't want to, ask too many repeating questions. But with that being said, let's just dive in. So for those who I guess have or haven't read your book, you got into card counting by reading Bringing Down the House and Busting Vegas, correct?
Yeah, that's sort of when I read Bringing Down the House, I was very entertained by it, and then was really excited about picking up the sequel, Busting Vegas. Still had no aspirations of becoming a professional card counter. However, Busting Vegas being specifically about Semyon Dukac, who was also living in Boston at the time, he was offering seminars on blackjack and card counting, and I thought it'd be kind of a cool thing to be able to meet him. So I went to one of those, again, really not thinking about having any sort of future in blackjack. But from there, meeting a couple of the people there and sort of figuring out where I might go with it, one thing led to another, and that's kind of where it all began.
So that's interesting. You said not really expecting to have any future in blackjack. Was it more just you enjoyed the stories and thought, hey, this guy's right here, it'd be fun to meet him in person and just kind of have a face and a voice to the name?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I showed up and realized that was more instructional than a meet and greet, I was sort of taken aback. Like, well, I'm not trying to learn anything here. I just enjoyed the story and thought it was cool to have the opportunity to meet Semyon. And we spent the entire day kind of going through all sorts of techniques. And it was at the end of that day that someone sort of said, hey, does anybody here want to get together and try to practice this on our own? And that was kind of the first time I even thought about blackjack for me. And so for some reason, I just sort of raised my hand and said, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in that. I'm happy to host. And we started out with, I think, about 4 or 5 guys. And then some people weren't able to make it. And next thing you know, it was three of us. And then it was just ended up being DA and myself, who developed a good friendship and obviously went on to play professionally. So
I've got no shortage of questions about you and DA, but before we get there, I'm just curious, you meet and, it turns into it being a little more instructional than you're expecting. When you decided to actually start practicing and training, what was your motivation for getting into it?
I think I was caught up in the excitement of the idea of it at first. And it was funny because I remember that first kind of kitchen table practice, if you will. We sort of jumped right into counting and quickly realized that we were missing a couple of steps before getting to that. And that's when we sort of all, I think at that point there were 3 or 4 of us, we kind of took a step back and said, okay, let's start from the beginning. Where do we need to begin here? Let's just master basic strategy. Everybody come back next week. We'll see where we're at with basic strategy. And we would do that until we mastered that piece of it. And then we kind of set a new goal or a target for ourselves, keeping account or, calculating true count conversions, that kind of thing. But we really did take it one step at a time, and through that process, that's kind of where that attrition happened with the other guys that were joining us. So before we knew it, there were just two of us left. Yeah.
So this was without Semyon at this point?
Yeah. In fact, we went... so Semyon he offered a little bit of guidance, obviously the training seminar, and then a little bit of guidance along the way. But we were practicing on our own to the point where we got pretty comfortable with what we were doing. Of course, it's at the kitchen table, so you never know. Yeah. And we just felt like we had plateaued a little bit. So we went back to him to see if we could have, more training and that sort of thing. But he respectfully declined. Just saying he was kind of out of the game, and that just really wasn't his thing anymore. But that's when he suggested that we contact Mike Aponte.
Mm-hmm. So how cool is it, by the way, that Semyon wrote the foreword to the Blackjack Life? Was that cool? This guy that you basically paid just just to meet and greet, and
it was when I had written sort of the first draft of my book. I reached out to anybody I could who was sort of a player in the book, just to get their opinion, kind of to get their okay. And so he was the first one I sent it to, and I emailed it to him, and the next day he responded and said, "Let's get together."
Wow.
And so he's like, "I read it overnight. I love it. I want to get together and talk to you about it." We went out to lunch, and not that I'm trying to compare my book to Bringing Down the House, but he referenced that, sort of saying like, "I like your book. I like this book a lot because it feels like it's more real and more accurate in some ways." And he's like, "Whatever I can do to help you." Wow. Get it published, promote it, whatever I can do to help. And I was just sort of blown away by that.
That's awesome. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it. It is a lot more real and relatable than Bringing Down the House. I've heard some people say they saw 21 the movie and it didn't feel like something they could really do. Then they saw Holy Rollers, the documentary that followed the Blackjack team I helped run, and they're like, "Oh wow, real people can do this," which I always take as, "Oh wow, these guys aren't that smart, so I'm sure I could do it too." But it's true. We're not MIT whiz kids.
I do cringe a little bit at this idea of being labeled the average Joe, which I get a lot. But yeah, it's, obviously I didn't go to MIT and that sort of thing, but, and really anyone can do it with enough hard work and practice. But at the same time, I'd like to think that I do have some intelligence, and it's not just hard work, but
that I feel like that comes across in the book. I mean, you guys didn't take a lazy approach to any aspect of your game. The standards you had for yourselves were honestly higher than the standards we had for the church team. So I don't think I didn't get average Joe feeling from it. But okay, so going back to the seminar, you meet some people, and DA is the one that you end up teaming up with for your entire career. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly feel like there's no way that I would be where I am today with my Blackjack career or the book or anything without his presence. The funny thing though was when I first met him, I got a bad vibe from him. I'm just like, I kind of thought he seemed a little arrogant and that sort of thing, which is actually couldn't be further from the truth. Just a humble guy and sort of quiet, and I guess I took that the wrong way. But he and I developed a really strong friendship. We're still close friends today, and but that there were, I guess, 7 or 8 guys at the seminar, and he and I became really good friends. So
have you thought about how differently things might have played out if you hadn't attended that seminar and met DA?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hard to think about that. I guess it's I'm grateful for that experience, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. I was going through a particularly difficult time in my own life at the time, and so it sort of gave me something to wrap my arms around and get fired up about and get excited about, and just kind of everything fell into place. And it's like, it sounds a little cliche, but it's like, I discovered something in the unlikeliest of places, that being the game of blackjack. So
yeah.
I'm very fortunate to have crossed paths with him as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So what do you think were some of the personality traits that made you guys such a good fit?
So we are very similar. And the biggest difference between us is I'm just a little bit older. And so at the time, I sort of thought of myself as more mature, even though I was, in my early 30s and was anything but. But and what we discovered was, we both liked sports. We both like to have a couple of beers here and there. So oftentimes we'd sit around philosophizing about blackjack over a couple of drinks, watching sports. We both, liked the Red Sox and local teams and that sort of thing. So we just had a lot in common. We both were financial advisors. Actually, at the time, he wasn't. He now is. He was getting his MBA.
Okay.
In Boston, and but we had finance in common as well. So it was a good fit, and and we meshed really well together. And neither one of us had sort of any inkling of needing to be the man. We, from a partnership perspective, we both were happy with either one of us was, taking the lead in a particular casino or a particular aspect of our team. But so the ego was definitely set aside when it came to the two of us working together.
Man, that's really cool. I just filmed a couple videos that had to do with teaming up, because a lot of people are like, oh, I want to be a card counter, so how do I start a team or join a team? And one of the biggest things I say is that your values, your goals have to align, in all these ways, or else it's just not going to fit. And it sounds like you guys had all those things, like the goal for perfection, or even overachieving with your standards, and that you weren't playing around with card counting. You wanted to make real money with it. You're both hardworking and trustworthy, and you both had day jobs. And then the ego thing, I mean, that's huge too. Otherwise, when someone's losing, the person who's winning wants to take all the credit, but it's like just variance. So
it's true. And the other, I mean, obviously, you talk about any sort of team play, read any books or anything like that. Obviously, the number one thing is trust.
Yeah,
and certainly. There was that between us as well. And unless he's playing the longest con game in the world, I have the utmost trust and confidence in him, and vice versa. So that was something that we never, ever had to worry about. And that's a pretty solid feeling, where we had experiences with other teammates where that wasn't necessarily the case. And it skews everything if there's not that level of trust.
Yes, I was actually going to ask about that, because not everyone
real or imagined, even if it's just imagined and the other person is completely trustworthy. If you feel that in any sort of way, it can really throw things off kilter.
Yeah. So not everyone you teamed up with did work out so well. Is there any other advice you would give other newer card counters when considering teaming up with someone?
Well, the obvious aspect to the trust factor is with regard to money, but there's more to it than that. If you're training with people that you like, there might be a tendency to let their skills maybe not be up to par, just because you don't want to be the person to say, hey, you're not good enough.
Yeah.
You need to work harder. Or is this person highly skilled, completely trustworthy with money, but left to their own devices at a table where they're, things are not going their way? Do they start to press and overbet? Things like that. So the trust factor comes in a variety of forms, and I just think it's important that there's open dialogue and the ability to say you're not up to par right now, and not have to apologize for that, and for the person who's being told that to be able to respect that and say, yep, you know what, you're right, I need to work harder. That level of open communication, I think, is just critical for a successful team.
Yeah, that's such good advice. When I look back at the church team, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made running the team, I mean, these guys, they're my friends. I'm hiring firing friends. And I think my personality is, I'd at the end of the day, I'd probably rather get screwed than screw over a friend. Right. So that would, I would lean towards, someone didn't really nail their test out, but I'd be like, I'm sure they have a winning game, And so I'd send them, send them out, and then they'd lose $80,000, and I'd be like, I think that, that wasn't a good enough standard. And the reality is, it did screw over friends, just not maybe,
not that one.
Well, yeah. I mean, the other players on the team, are having to make less money because of some people who's really shouldn't have been out there playing, or even the person that shouldn't have been out there playing. In a sense, I'm screwing them over by not really holding them to a standard. They either shouldn't be playing blackjack, or they need to work harder to get to a level where they can have, a really strong game. And that stuff was hard to do in my, mid to late 20s, but I think that's really good advice you gave. You just got to be able to have those conversations and have no ego in it.
Right.
So let's step back a little bit. Can you just briefly walk us through your daily or weekly training routine when you guys were still training?
Sure. It was pretty intense, and one of the nice things between DA and I was that we're also both very competitive. And so whether it was even counting down a deck of cards, whatever we knew was going to happen the next week when we were going to get together, neither one of us wanted to lose. So it was all we did in our free time. It was, for me, sometimes in between appointments, I'd be counting down decks of cards. Certainly at home every night, I was going, dealing myself shoe after shoe. We would just try to be as creative as possible as far as challenging ourselves. So one person would go in the other room, for example. The other person would lay out a deck of cards, but sort of just all over the table. Not in any sort of sequence, just a big mess on the table. Making sure that at least every card's could be, visible in some way, just even if it was just the corner of it. And then we'd call the other person back in, and we'd time each other. How quickly can we just scan the whole table? Can't touch the cards, can't move anything around. Just have to look at it all and see how quickly you can do that. Then another time we'd put the lights down super low. You could barely see. You'd have to stand a certain distance back, and then we'd be playing. We got a Sesame Street DVD where they're singing counting songs. So there's all this counting going on out loud in the background while we're trying to count. So we would just try to think of any way we could challenge ourselves to keep count, constantly doing calculations as far as like true count conversion. So we'd have a pile of index cards that would have a variety of running counts. And then we'd have another pile that would have a variety of index cards, but written on them would say, for example, 2.75. So that would represent how many decks had been played. So we'd, flip over one and it'd be the running count is 15, flip over the other and it would say 2.75, and we'd calculate that we'd say, okay, so 3 1/4 is left to be played. Therefore, the true count is 4.5, and not with the offset that we use, it's 3.5. And then we'd have a third pile of index cards that would say what the unit was, and we'd make it something, strange, like $130. So we'd do $130 times 3.5 to get the betting. And so we would do that over and over again. So anything that we could think of, and it doesn't have to be that. So a lot of new counters will, new blackjack players will come to me or email me and say, what are those things that I need to do? And those are some ideas, but the reality is there are a million different ways that people can practice it. The key is not which one of those to use, but the fact that it requires practice and more practice and challenging the brain to sort of function in a certain way, so that the first time we got into a casino, it was boring. We were like, it is so slow and this is too easy, but that's a good thing. I mean, ultimately that's what we want it to be. So.
Absolutely. No, that's really good. One of the things I've been really thinking about more recently, and I kind of shared some of this at the most recent boot camp we just did, but it's not binary. It's not that you're either a losing player or winning player. There's actually levels of skill, and what I don't necessarily mean is like the number of deviations you use, but there could be someone that's barely a positive EV player, and there can be someone that is able to, I think counting is kind of binary. You either have the count or you don't. Basic strategy is binary, but how many rounds per hour can you play? And how comfortably can you play those things where if you were to watch, there could be someone that can barely pass the evaluation that I put them through at a boot camp, and then there can be one of our pros who's played for 3,000 hours, and you watch the two play, and the pro is going to be just be able to play way more rounds per hour and do it way more fluidly, and all those things that I think people need to consider beyond just like, I guess it depends what your goal is. Is it to technically beat the game, or is it to be exceptional, which really seemed like your guys' goal with card counting?
I do think that our goal was to be exceptional, and I think as a part of that process, what it ultimately allowed us to do was to have more bandwidth to apply strategies in the casino to allow us to play longer. So having conversations with pit personnel and having sort of these interactions, we would not have been able to do if we were just able to pass your boot camp checkout kind of thing. We had to be able to do that so well that in order to do the things that we were actually doing in the casino, because we would embrace the idea of sort of the loudmouth, drunk, college athlete, gambler kind of guy. But in order to do that and have that interaction with the pit personnel, I mean, we really, the more we had that kind of a relationship with those people, the more the more hands we could get in, and all the things that you were just outlining. And we would not have been able to do that unless just all of the aspects of card counting were world class.
Yep.
So that ended up becoming, our mission was to become world class, but it had sort of a secondary effect in terms of our play in the casinos. That was everything to us.
Man, if I ever run a large scale blackjack team again, I'm going to have tiers of test out, not just binary.
Good idea.
Yeah, man. If you can pass the test out and, get through a shoe in a shorter period of time, create different benchmarks, then you're going to get paid more because you're going to generate more EV and not just EV, like you said, be able to have the conversation with the pit while playing perfectly and, last longer and all those other things that add to the lifetime EV.
Yeah. And we played together a lot, as well, which has its pros and cons, but one of them would be that, as an example, let's say that we're at the same table and we often use this kind of balanced betting approach. Where if we both were supposed to put out $500, DA might put out $300 and then I would, know to put out $700. And so what would happen is, let's say that I was in a, sort of a very seemingly distracted conversation with the pit. I could literally look in another direction, not count at all for a hand being dealt, and have the cards scooped up, turn back to the table, and immediately DA would be giving me the count back. So, but we were so on point with that, that we were constantly communicating heat, communicating the count, communicating our next steps, communicating which strategy we were going to move in and out of, because we used a variety of cover strategies. But it really felt like something special when we were doing it, to be able to do some of the things that we were able to do.
That's awesome. So I want to get to the cover stuff, but before we get there, I'm just wondering, after you guys tested out with Mike Aponte, how many hours did you guys start putting in each month?
Well, so what I would say, as far as Mike is concerned, we did meet with him first, just the two of us with him, after Semyon sort of directed us back to Mike. He flew in to Boston. We spent the day with him, and he was really supportive and said, you guys have really done a good job here. There's some areas that we can fine tune. And if you're open to it, I'd be happy to love to take you guys under my wing, so to speak. And he's like, but there are certain things like, you guys know the illustrious 18. I want you to know, all deviations from basic strategy, some things like that. So I'd say we sort of passed the test in a way, like the initial test, that we weren't just wannabes, that we actually had some ability. And then he decided that he wanted to put together a team of his own. So he put together a group of guys who he put through the MIT checkouts. And DA and I were the first to pass those. Those were very rigorous, in some respects more rigorous than what we had been practicing on our own, and included signaling, and had very low margin for error, or else we would have failed. So after we passed that, we only played for a little while with Mike and his team. So we were playing with Mike and his team, and we also were doing things on our own. And so I would say that probably 3 out of every 4 weekends we were making trips, and still probably practicing as hard as we ever had. So it was probably a few years before, it was less about practicing, in between. It was, I guess, not that it's not important, but it wasn't as necessary.
Yeah, when you're getting that much,
you get to a point. Yeah,
that much table time, you're getting a lot of practice. It's good to still get your game checked out, but
right.
So, was it difficult to manage the day job with all these blackjack trips?
It wasn't really. It was what blackjack became for me was no different than someone that hits the gym after work and likes to run every day. It was just that just happened to be my thing. Mm-hmm. So I would leave the office Friday afternoon and drive right to the airport. I'd have my bags packed for the weekend, and I'd have a separate bag for returning on the red eye Sunday night into Monday morning. And by the time I got in, I'd grab the bag that I left in my car. The building that my office was in has a gym and a shower, so I would just go right into work. And so Monday through Friday, it didn't impact what I was doing with my career. I didn't have a whole lot going on, quite frankly, in my life at that point. So it was working Monday through Friday, getting on a plane, playing blackjack all weekend, coming back to work, and just doing it over and over and over again.
That's and how long were you doing this?
So, to varying degrees, from 2006 to probably 2010, kind of hardcore. And then it, around the time that the book was published in 2012, around that time, it was more sporadic. It was maybe once a month, and that sort of thing, until it kind of just was done.
Those are pretty much the exact same dates as the church team.
Yeah.
So we were probably crossing paths in Vegas,
That's
the
true,
whole time.
yeah.
Players on our team, at least, if not me.
Yeah.
That's wild. So in your book, I remember at one point there's someone you met through a forum that went by the name Billy Blackjack. At least that was the name in the book. And he wanted to bankroll you for $200,000. Do you mind just sharing that story briefly for people?
Sure. I mean, we were trying to scrape together whatever money we had just to have a bankroll. And so when the first trip we made, I think it was 6 months after we began training, we had, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but we maybe had like a $10,000 or $15,000 bankroll. We're playing red chips and at Foxwoods and then, but we felt like our skills were world class, but our bankroll was anything but. So on one of the forums, I think it was the forum, but there was a posting saying, I'm an investor, I don't play, I want to bankroll somebody, I live in, I think they specifically said Lowell, Massachusetts. If not, they said Massachusetts. And so, which was, 45 minutes away from, 45 minutes away from where I lived. And so one thing led to another. We were able to connect with him. And then he sort of, I guess he had gone to Mohegan Sun with another team who he was thinking about also bankrolling. And he changed his mind in terms of the amount from 200 to 100. And he also clearly had a misunderstanding about the idea of whether you win or lose in the fact that he thought that basically every time we would win. And so we knew that was sort of a red flag to begin with. And we tried really hard to sort of educate him and manage expectations. And so it was a dilemma for us. We felt like he didn't quite understand what it was all about.
Yeah.
He had these expectations that were unreasonable, but at the same time he had money, and we kind of moved forward with it. And the day that I went to pick up the money, which was sort of an unsettling experience, he said, "I'm only going to do 50." So he gave us 50, and it sort of just threw everything off. And we just knew deep down, I think we knew it just wasn't the right fit.
Yeah.
And so, and not only did he give us just 50 instead of the initial 200 that we were, very excited about, but he also said, I want this back, after every trip. And we're like, this is just sort of unrealistic.
Yeah.
So we were going on a trip, and we actually just basically broke even. We're up a little bit. So he got back more than he gave, but it was really well understood between us without even saying anything that when I dropped off the money, that was it. Our relationship was done, and we'd build our bankroll more organically.
Yeah. Well, I think it's generally best when people grow it organically for multiple reasons. One is you get to learn a lot of those lessons at lower stakes rather than jumping right into really high limit play. But also, I tell some people say, hey, I've got $20,000 and I have a friend or family member that is also going to give me $20,000. And, depending on how it's set up, what you could end up doing is betting twice as much, getting twice as much heat, having double the swings, all that. And then you're sharing the profits. So you're actually not, maybe you're making a little bit more, but is it really, worth it at the end of the day? So I 9 times out of 10 recommend people just grow it the old fashioned way, put the hours in and then you get to enjoy even that. I don't know. It's like the process ends up, when you look back at it, the process was as big a deal as the actual money made, and look back and say hey,
you're absolutely right, Colin. After that period of time, it felt so much better to make our own money, build our own bankroll, and we didn't have this sort of cloud hanging over us of Billy Blackjack and what is he going to think and what is he going to do and how is he going to react if we have, a downswing, which we inevitably would have. It takes all of that off the table, and we're really just dealing with money that can be sort of utilized to its full extent rather than feeling like any pressure to sort of play scared in a way. And, I think there were all sorts of documents that we got from Semyon and his seminar, and some of them were sort of recycled checklists and things like that from the MIT teams back in the day. But there was this one that had sort of I don't know if it was 10 sort of laws of card counting, and one of them is that you always get your money on the table when you have that advantage. And we didn't want to feel like, hey, I'm kind of scared to bet what I'm supposed to bet right here, not because of losing, but because of how Billy Blackjack's going to respond if we do. So we were so much better off after that.
I can totally relate to that. What I tell people is I never lost a night's sleep losing my own money. But, having to tell, our investors, like my father-in-law, hey, just so you know, we are down 200,000. It's like not a fun, or even we'd go out to my in-laws and he'd be like, so how's the team doing? It's like, oh, why do you have to ask? Like, I just give it time. But when it was my own money, like, you complain when you're losing, but you also just keep grinding and, you're going to get it back.
Yep.
So I want to circle back around to the cover strategies. I thought this was pretty interesting, both from kind of describing them, but which I think I've personally done all of them except for the combining balance betting. Yeah. I hadn't done that one, but also just thinking in terms of how we approached our team versus how you guys approached it. So, my first question is if you guys calculated the EV loss from using cover strategy, or were you a little less worried about that and much more thinking about longevity?
So I'd say that, from a cover strategy perspective, cover bets, cover plays, those obviously cut into your EV. That was less of what made our overall strategy successful. And it was more about, we didn't have the luxury of having a large team, so that we could play spotters at lots of tables and then call in the big player and the standard, strategy. So there are some people who back count and sit down when the count's in their favor, wonging in. There are some people who, some smaller groups that will signal to each other. Then, of course, there's the call-ins and big player approach. I think what made our overall strategy successful is that we didn't choose just one of them. What we did was we would employ all of them in a single session. So we might start by each of us back counting 2 different tables at the same time. So we're covering 4 tables at once. And then we would signal in the other person. That person would sit down, we'd pass the count. Then we might later on sit down at that table and then switch to a signaling thing, where all of a sudden the person that originally sat down sort of foregoes being the big player, if you will, and all of a sudden kind of shifts to a signaling strategy, to then shifting to a balanced betting approach. And if you were to sort of be monitoring that, if you're surveillance, there's so many different things. You can't just look at that and say, here's what they're doing. They're doing call-ins. Or here's what they're doing. They're signaling to each other. Because we might be doing that for a little bit, and then all of a sudden we're not doing that. We're doing something else. And all of it being mathematically sound. And so I think that was kind of the success we had was due to that. In addition to that, we certainly did have certain cover plays, like, just from a very basic perspective, one of us would always hit 16 versus a 10. The other person would always stand 16 versus a 10. So, were we giving up a tiny bit of EV there? Yeah. But the reality was those cover plays were so small. And I think that the key to the cover plays is that, you're doing cover plays that are small, and we weren't doing the same thing. So that was a big thing for us, was that we wouldn't. My cover plays were different than his cover plays. We didn't just say like we're both going to do these, and so we would mix those up, and cover bets as well. So we sort of employed a little bit of the Ian Anderson approach of burning the tables, as far as sort of chipping down after a loss, not after a win, and chipping out after a win.
That was a little later in your guys' playing days that you started incorporating more. Is that correct? It was at least later in the book that it really was an evolution. So when we started, we were, whatever Mike Ponte says, that's what we'll do. And Mike Aponte's approach was, you go hardcore, you hit all of the index numbers, you bet exactly according to the true count, no
variation, and when you get burned out, you get burned out.
Mm-hmm.
And then we realized that, we're not MIT. We don't have, 30 people. It's just us two. And when we're burned out, that's kind of the end. So we realized that we needed to evolve. And I think that we did that over time, a little bit through trial and error and out of necessity. And we wanted to do that, but we also didn't want to end up being, not playing with an advantage.
Yeah, totally.
Obviously. And so we wanted to be sensitive to that. So every step of the way, as we evolved, we would always ask ourselves, what is this costing us?
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Is there a way to do it better? And we just kept getting better, and we learned a lot of things along the way. And by the end, we were doing more of that kind of cover betting.
Mm-hmm. So that's really good. I mean, I want people that are listening, especially someone that's newer to card counting, to understand you've got to be really careful. Anything you're doing that's costing you money, you do too much of it, and then you're playing for free. You've got to break even. I've known card counters that tip away their edge. I've known card counters that use so much cover they don't have an edge, or they play through so many negative counts, or are so worried about acting natural that they're not even counting well because they're focusing on their conversation with the pit boss rather than playing well. But so just what you said about really evaluating the cost of everything. But at this point, you guys had a very strong game. I think one other thing that was unique is you guys were kind of weekend warriors, which meant you couldn't. So there are some of the guys that have come through Blackjack Apprenticeship, or just guys that are actively playing full time, and a couple of guys I'm thinking of are like a guy named Raimo, or my buddy Joe, or this guy that goes by the name Yoshi. And these guys, I don't think they use any cover at all, but they also can go on a week-long road trip, or some of them will go on like a month-long road trip. But you guys had to fly. There's really only so many places, and when you're burned out to those places that you can fly to for a weekend of play, like you said, your career's over, rather than like, well, now I'm going to be in, middle of nowhere USA for 2 weeks,
Sure.
So.
And quite frankly, if we were in the middle of nowhere, we would approach that differently than if we were in a casino that we knew that we were going to come back to. So we wanted to be, we didn't just apply the same approach everywhere we went. We really kind of took a look at where we were and what we were trying to accomplish. I mean, some places we would spread, huge spreads, knowing that it was just a matter of time. And then other places we're a little more careful with our spreads. But the more that everybody talks about the cost of cover, but also what's the value? So what do you get out of that cost? What are you paying for? So if you're giving up a little in cost, what are you getting? Yes. So for us, it would be longevity, and it would also be the ability to spread more, and other ways that we could be profitable as a result of that small cost.
Yeah, playing rated, it could be the comp value, which can be a big deal.
That's true too.
So I've got a few more questions for you, and then we can wrap up. So with the whole cover and that stuff, I know you write about you guys had your own database of casino conditions. How did you guys keep that database? Was it like an Excel doc or Google Doc?
It was Excel.
Okay. Yeah. And you just kept track of as much, like I'll say the church team, we had like an internal website we had built. It was basically a forum that people could leave notes on every casino in the country, which was, basically the earlier players on the team really paved the way for some of the later players to be like, do not play this shift or or this casino or this city. Like it's a wasted trip. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we did have sort of a shared document folder with all of our team manual and our database. it would be, we documented after every session. We had sort of these little notebooks that we carried in our back pocket, and we'd write down everything that we could from every session. So it would be the dealer name, anything about them, if they're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. We wrote that down. What their shift was, if they were the ones that placed the cut card, what the penetration was like, dealers that made more mistakes, shifts to avoid, casinos to avoid, same kind of stuff that you're talking about. We did keep all of that, and it really came in handy because we would walk in to a casino, and I'm one of those guys that cannot remember a name after somebody introduces themselves. But I would walk in well prepared and be like, "Hey, Maureen, how are you? I know you just had your granddaughter last year. How is she doing? That kind of stuff." And it was really helpful to us. A quick funny story. I know we're running out of time, but
no, we're good.
At the very end of the the end of my career, if you will, was playing in Revel, which Revel's no longer, but it's the casino's open again. I can't remember. I think it's called Ocean in Atlantic City.
Okay.
And we had hit it really hard for a long period of time, and we had great relationships with the pit, and we had incredible hosts. Our comps were ridiculous, and so we loved it there. And we came in one Friday, and I sat down at the table, started playing for a little while, and the count was starting to inch up, and it was pretty good. I started betting a little bit more, and all of a sudden the pit boss, actually the floor person, came over, and I waved to him. He was kind of in the corner, and he looked at me and waved, and I waved back, and he came over, and I'm like, "Hey, Joe, how are you?" And he shook my hand. He's like, "Good, Nathaniel. How you been?" I'm like, "Great." And he's like, "Oh, I meant to tell you." He's like, "I really enjoyed your book."
Oh, man.
And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. I appreciate that." He's like, "What's the count right now?" And I'm like, "It's 13." And I'm like, "You want me to go?" He's like, "Yeah, you can do what you want." And of course, in Atlantic City, they can't. They can't ask you to leave, but obviously they just shuffle up or whatever they would do. So I'm like, you know what, I'll just get up and go. And so he's like, "Let me walk you to the cage." And so we were walking to the cage, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm just doing my job." And I'm like, "I get it. And I hope I'm just doing mine." And he's like, "Yeah." And the cool thing was, he said, "Tell you what, if you don't try to play here again this weekend, I won't flyer you until Monday." And I'm like, "You got a deal." And so It was just kind of a cool interaction, but it was also one of those things where I was sort of like, okay, I think my time is officially up. Yeah.
Man, that's an awesome story on so many levels. That you knew him from across the casino, that he read your book, and that by treating him well, he, treated you much better than, a typical casino might,
Yeah.
So
there's one other funny story was we were playing in Vegas, and this was around the kind of the same time as this other story happened, and we were playing at the SLS, and it was funny because DA and I were at a table, and there was one other guy, and we're all black chippers, and at that time, and the casino, who was it? I think it was the casino shift manager, came over and said, shook DA's hand and shook my hand and said, "I'm so-and-so, the casino shift manager." Not in a friendly way, even though he was shaking our hand. And the other guy at our table started to complain and saying, "Hey man, I'm betting just as much as they are. Why are you shaking their hand?" And I'm like, and I just looked at him. I'm like, trust me, you don't want him to be shaking your hand right now. And like, right as soon as I finished that, he's like, you guys got to get the F out of here. You're not welcome here anymore. And the look on the guy's face was just funny. He's like, oh yeah, I got it.
That's awesome. You should have gotten that guy backed off too.
I know, right?
Oh, that's awesome. So I don't want to take too much more of your time, but one of the things I really enjoyed about your story is that it ends well. Like it seems like you guys didn't hold on to the card carrying chapter of your lives too long. Like it seemed like it was a really good fit for a season, and then it just seemed like you were okay hanging it up or at least putting it on the shelf for a while. What were those conversations like for you and DA?
It's like a bit like tipping over a soda machine. Like you can't do it on the first push. It has to kind of rock back and forth before it falls over. So, I mean, it wasn't ever cold turkey. It was, we're going to take a break from it, and then we come back to it, and then we take a little bit longer break. We come back to it a little less intensely than before, and eventually it just sort of faded out, I guess. Our friendship remained intact. We still make trips every year, but more for fun than anything else. And we'll play craps, and we still get comp offers and free rooms and food. So we still take advantage of that stuff. But it's, for us, we're both as financial advisors. I mean, that's kind of our thing. And, we both have children, and as you know, that's a full-time job in and of itself. And so it has a really special place in my heart, obviously. About, there's a huge part of my life for a long period of time, but it is what it is. I guess it's just no longer the main focus of my life. Yeah. And but I learned so much from it. And even in my profession as a financial advisor, I learned more about market fluctuations and dealing with standard deviation and all of that because of my experience with Blackjack.
Yeah.
More so than the other way around. And so there are a lot of parallels. I mean, part of what I do with my investment portfolios is I'm looking at the quantitative metrics of the market, and when the conditions are healthier, then we put more client money in the market, and when they're not, we pull back. So it's very much like counting. It's just in a different form than a casino.
Yep.
And so at first I was nervous about publishing under my own name because I didn't want to give clients or prospective clients the wrong impression. But in reality, it was the best thing for my career. And
interesting.
All my clients are aware of my experience with Blackjack and the book, but I talk about it in terms not of the gamble, but in terms of the math behind it and how that applies to what we do with their portfolio. And I think it really resonates with some people, particularly my clients, and they've been very supportive of that. So it's the two kind of go hand in hand, and Blackjack will always be a part of my life in some fashion, even if it's not, the weekend warrior grind that it once was.
I know Ed Thorpe talks a lot about how the Blackjack tables are such a great teacher in terms of learning about investing and money management and all that. So I'm sure, he applied it to the market, and sounds like you are too. Are there any other kind of life lessons you feel like card carrying taught you?
Besides the resilience that's needed to deal with the swings, it just was one of those things where it reinforced what everybody knows, which is that the best way to have success is to work really hard. And, you see movies like 21 and whatnot. And, they go from betting nothing to all of a sudden betting $10,000.
Yeah.
And it's all glamorous, and there's backroom stuff, and there's getting beat up and running and getting chased and all of that stuff. The reality is, it's to be a successful card counter or to be successful in business or whatever it might be, it just requires a lot of tedious hard work and commitment to whatever craft you happen to be trying to excel at. And that for me was kind of the biggest takeaway. And the fact that even from the beginning, it was like I knew right away that we started too far ahead and we needed to go back to square one and say, what's the first thing we need to perfect?
Yeah.
And then what's the next thing we need to perfect in a very systematic way of learning and any skill. And I really value that experience that I had.
That's great. So I got one last question for you. Do you think you'll ever come out of retirement, or are you pretty happy just leaving that chapter in the past?
It depends on whether or not everything turns to 6 to 5 payoffs. No, I can't see me coming out of retirement to go back to what I was doing at the time. If there was some unique opportunity for me to learn something new and apply some new craft in terms of casinos, I'd be open to it. I love that world in a way, and I also hate it in a way. I'm very conflicted by it. So it would have to be a really unique opportunity. It wouldn't just be like, hey, let's start going every weekend to Vegas and counting cards and back counting and doing call-ins and things like that. That's probably behind me.
I think that's a great answer. I remember at one of the Blackjack balls, Ed Thorpe gave a talk and he said, what's next? We should always be asking ourselves what's next.
Right.
Because we can get kind of stuck into one thing and, never ask ourselves that question. And, I'm really thankful for card counting. And I actually went on, my first trip in quite a while recently, and it was fun, but it's not the same thing it was before. And, I consider it a trade. You can pick it up, you can put it down.
Sure.
But for you to be able to say, what I'm doing now is what's next. And it might actually be a step backwards to try to do what you were doing 10 years ago. So I think that's
and awesome. I think also I have a difficult time doing anything sort of halfway. And so if I were to do anything, it would be something that I'd want to immerse myself in, and I'd want to be as world class as I could be before doing it. So and that's the other thing. I have lots of people will say, well, if we'll go to a casino this weekend and you'll crush it. And I'm like, well, I need to go every weekend for a year and we'll see where I'm at.
Yeah.
And that's, I just don't have the capacity for that in my life right now.
I totally get it. We were hanging out after the last boot camp, me and some of the kind of pros that were still just chilling at the house, and someone was saying like, oh, why don't you, put another team together or hit it hard? And it's like, well, the only way I could do that is if that's really all I'm focusing on. Yeah. And to do that means I've got a bunch of kids and I run Blackjack Apprenticeship, right. I would have to put Blackjack Apprenticeship completely on the back burner, which I'm not going to do because I'm having too much fun.
That's great.
Running it. That's so great. I can totally relate to that. It's like all in or all out, unless it's just on a side hobby scale. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun for me. And
it's my pleasure.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people are going to learn a lot from hearing from your story, and obviously people can pick up The Blackjack Life if they haven't read it. If they have read it, it's probably fun for them to at least put a voice to the stories. So thanks so much for doing this. And for all those listening, you can check out The Blackjack Life. I'm sure it's It's on Amazon or wherever else people buy books. And if you want to learn more about beating blackjack, check out Blackjack Apprenticeship.